Hello and welcome to Bandwidth Conversations, a podcast that finds out about the stories and journeys of artists, performers, and rock stars of life. I'm Katie Brewer, and I need to tell you a story about my guest today. A few months back, I had open heart surgery. It's a fairly routine operation these days, but it felt pretty major to me. And there were times in the hospital when I just wanted to take it all back, have my old heart back with its failing valve, as I was finding it all too much. I wasn't up to having visitors, and kind friends sent me flowers, books, and Netflix recommendations. The one that stood out above all others was the one my aunt, Leslie Teasdale, gave me, and it was a book called Lessons in Chemistry. This book literally transformed my recovery. It made me forget about my exhaustion, my breathlessness, my fears. It distracted me from the pain I was in. I escaped into a world filled with delightful, heartwarming, wonderfully flawed characters that the author somehow managed to make me fall in love with from the very first page. I read it before sleeping. I read it when I woke up. When I went home and had to build up my strength walking, I took it to the park and aimed for a bench with another chapter as reward. Of course, when you love a book that much, it doesn't last very long. So towards the end, I had to ration myself as I couldn't bear for it to end. I was devastated to say goodbye to Elizabeth, Mad, Harriet, 630, and the joy, wonder, and companionship they had brought me. Anyway, living with my head in the sand, which I seem to do most of the time, I had never heard of this book before. I immediately recommended it to everyone I spoke to, and pretty much all of them had already read it and all had adored it. I now realize it's a multi-million copy bestseller. It's in over 40 countries and has won far too many awards for me to list here. Such is its success, it has been made into a television series on Apple Plus starring Brie Larson. I felt compelled to tell the author how she had transformed my recovery, and not really expecting a reply, I also told her about my podcast. I did think to myself, someone who writes such likable, relatable, quirky people with such humor must be a nice person. And indeed, she was so nice that despite being crazy busy, she agreed to talk to me today. So I am beyond excited to be talking to Lessons in Chemistry author Bonnie Garmus. Bonnie, thank you so much for talking to me.
Katie, that was the nicest introduction I've ever gotten in my entire life. And I really appreciate everything you said. And honestly, your story, when you wrote me, it was so incredibly touching. You're so courageous. You're so brave that, to tell you the truth, you reminded me of Elizabeth Zott.
Gosh.
I just thought, of course, I'm going to talk to Katie, who is Elizabeth Zott.
Well, I have to say, I think that might be the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me. So I'm going to take that. For those who don't know, well, firstly, where have you been? But Lessons in Chemistry is set in the 1950s. Elizabeth Zott, wonderful Elizabeth Zott, is a scientist who is constantly being undermined, demeaned, held back by male co-workers, but has a clarity of vision and an unwavering sense of her own worth and of what's right. Sad things happen to her, unfair things happen. She loses her job as a chemist and has to make ends meet by becoming the TV host of a cookery show, Supper at 6. But on top of teaching delicious meals, she uses it to teach women about the chemistry of food. And it's a story about the people that orbit around her, her family, her friends, her co-workers, and her rivals. And it tackles misogyny, sexism, childhood trauma. It's hilarious, sad, warm, both enraging and enchanting. Right, so I'm going to stop talking now. What was the catalyst for this particular story?
It was a bad day at work, to be completely frank. I know it's always a little embarrassing, but it turns out, I think, we think of anger as a bad thing, but sometimes anger is actually very empowering, and it's really smart to use it in a way that's constructive. And I didn't know I was using it constructively that day, but I'd been in a meeting. All of my ideas that I'd been presenting in that meeting, it was all male meeting in technology. All of my ideas were claimed stolen by someone else in the room. And even though I protested vigorously, no one paid any attention to me. I'd gone through various phases of meeting sexism head on in my career. But that day, that one was really tough for me because some of the men in the room were my friends, and they didn't advocate for me. They didn't say, wait a minute, these are her ideas. No one said anything. And so when I went back to my desk that day, I was so mad. And I felt like as I walked back, I kept thinking about women all over the world. And I had to wonder how many women had had that same day that I had just had, and how much longer is this
Yes.
going to go on? And so I sat down, and instead of working, and because as they reminded me when I left the meeting, I had something due at 5. I never did that piece. I wrote the first chapter of Lessons in Chemistry.
There was a lovely story that I listened to an interview that you did that years later, when it was published, one of those men in that board meeting came to you. And that's such a great turnaround, and also lovely because when you have those kind of meetings as a woman, you can think, well, maybe it's me. Maybe I got that wrong. And anyway, I'm going to let you tell the story.
Well, that day I was certain I hadn't gotten it wrong, but there were other meetings where I thought, maybe I shouldn't have spoken up so loudly, or, the ridiculous things you say to yourself,
Yes.
to excuse other people's behavior when the behavior's on them. That's not your behavior, it's their behavior. And so, yes, I wrote this book, and I was at a signing in Seattle, and I hadn't spoken to any of those men. I never worked for that group again, ever. And I hadn't spoken to any of them in, I don't know, more than 10 years. And suddenly I looked up, and there was a man coming towards me at this signing. He had 10 books under his arm, and I recognized him immediately because I'd worked with him for so long, and he just looked sick to his stomach. He bent down next to me and he said, "Thank you for not naming our names." And
wow.
I said, I would not do that. First of all, I'm under NDA. I don't use real people in my writing. And third of all, whatever. Anyway, we had a small chat, and the 10 books were, of course, for everybody who'd been in the meeting that day. And he had me sign each one of them for the people in that meeting. And, I didn't really wish anyone ill, except for the one guy who, to this day, his name is still on my work. And to him, I just wrote, "Karma's a bitch." Anyway,
that's
so
perfect.
my friend actually, he said to me, and he is my friend again, he said, that day, I remember that day so vividly because I went home that night and I thought about it all day, and I could see how devastated you were. And I was sitting there reading my 2 daughters a bedtime story. And I thought, what did I just do? I have 2 daughters. If I can't stand up for a friend of mine, and I can't stand up for her because she's a woman and we can brush her aside, what are they going to expect as they grow up? And will they have been proud of the way I was? And so I thought that was really great.
From that first chapter, what was the timeline between that first chapter, finishing the book, finding an agent, it may not have happened in that order, and having it published?
So it took me about 5 years to write. I always think when I say that, it sounds like I'm really slow, but it turns out 5 years is really common, especially if you're working full time. And I was working full time. And especially if you're a writer working full time as a writer, you really don't want to write again when you get home. So it took me about 5 years. But what I did was I started getting up in the morning really early to work on it before work. And then when I was about 3/4 of the way through, we were based in Switzerland at that time. We'd been transferred there. We were suddenly moved to London. I've moved a lot in my life, and I think I wasn't quite prepared for yet another move. And I didn't really want to move to a place where I knew absolutely no one. And so when I got to London, I joined a writing class at Curtis Brown to make friends. Really, I wasn't really interested in taking a writing class because sometimes they're not very helpful. But I think Curtis Brown does a great job of just making you take yourself seriously as a writer. And so I joined this class, and sure enough, I met 14 fellow writers, and they became instant friends of mine. And it made all the difference to me in London. I love those people. And I realized that, I still had about 1/4 of the novel to write. And I wasn't sure. I had the ending because I wrote the ending the same day that I wrote the last 3 sentences of the ending.
Did you?
I just needed something to kind of shoot towards.
Yeah.
I didn't think it would last, but it did. But I knew that I had to write the last 1/4 of it, and I wasn't sure yet what it was going to be. And I didn't do much work on it in that class, to be honest. I only gave them what I'd already written. And they only, in those classes, you only see about 1,000 words of someone's work. It's not like they see the book. But I was lucky enough at the end of the class, which was only 3 months long, and it was one night a week. At the end of the class, Curtis Brown has a party for all the writers, and they combined us with another class. So there were 30 of us there for a party, and everyone wants to talk to an agent and pitch their book. And unbelievably, that night, Felicity Blunt approached me, and she told me that she'd read the first, I think it was 10,000 words of my book, and told me that she wanted to see more. And a couple other agents also approached me and said the same thing that night.
Wow. And was that a total surprise for you at that point?
I thought Felicity Blunt had mixed me up with another writer and I kept waiting for confirmation that I was right, that she was wanting to speak to one of the writers who was writing a thriller because she loves thrillers. I thought, this is not me, but Elizabeth Zott. And I thought, oh my gosh, she is talking to me. At any rate, I promised all of them that I would be done with my book in June. I don't know why I said that. I had to pick a date. But in April, Felicity called and she said, you know what? Just on the strength of what I've seen, the 10,000 words, I'm going to sign you. So I was extremely lucky to be signed before she'd read the entire book. And, because querying is awful, it's horrible for writers and the rejection is endless. So that's really how it all unfolded. And then she had some suggestions for the book. And then after that happened, then she took it to Frankfurt. It went through auction, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally it got published.
I was at a dinner last night and I sat next to Matthew Pinsent, who knows a thing or two about rowing, given his 4 gold Olympic medals. He read your book, his reading group all loved it. And I said, okay, well, if you have a question for Bonnie, what would it be? And he said, well, one of the many brilliant things about it is that it doesn't follow a typical sort of story arc. And he said, I wonder, what input did you have, like a first reader who helped you shape it, or was it all in your own head until it got to Felicity Blunt?
It was all in my head. I mean, I don't really write from an outline, and my structure, that's the worst part for me, is structure. And I kind of, when I let the characters decide, they lead me. I don't try to work from plot or anything like that. I really allow people to come in and say, here's what I'm going to do now. And so that was the big thing. Felicity wanted to reshape it a little bit. We had some arguments there about that, because I'm a copywriter. And a copywriter is really good at shaping because we have to work in very small increments. And I think a typical novel, you're right, follows a very, not simplistic, but it follows a certain pattern. I had no interest in using that pattern. And I didn't want to leave readers behind, but I tend to believe every reader is intelligent. And you should never dumb anything down for anyone, because they want something a little more complicated than what we usually give them. And so I wanted to do it that way. And luckily, Felicity, she is just the greatest agent I could ask for. And she was wonderful. And so, we worked on that. And then really, though, my first reader is my husband. He's an incredibly good reader. He's extremely well read, and he doesn't hold back. If he doesn't like something, he says, oh, the rhythm here's off, or this isn't working. He doesn't know how to fix it. He just says, it's sort of like Felicity, where she goes, I don't like this part. He'll say, I don't like this part, right. and to me, that's great feedback to get.
Yes. And was the Felicity Blunt moment, was that the moment that you realized it was something special? At what point did you think, I'm on the right track here?
Never.
Really?
I just assumed it wouldn't get published. It's such a shot in the dark to get published. One of my friends told me that she had just read, and then I confirmed it. I looked it up. You only have a 1 in 10,000 chance of even getting an agent. And then the odds of you getting published are really low. And then the odds of that book helping you make a living are really low. 98% of all novelists around the world make less than minimum wage. And that, you can't live on that. And so I was making a good living as a copywriter, and I felt like I had all that experience from copywriting to bring to a novel, but copywriting is very short and novels are very long. And that's where I started to stumble, is with the length. I could just go on and on, because to me, the book is a series of stories about all these different people and how they view Elizabeth Zott, I really had to put a leash on myself not to just keep going.
Keep going. Yeah. Well, and those characters are just so winning. I interviewed Patrick Gale, who's a fellow author, and he said that when he does stories from multiple viewpoints, that he has to do all the chapters of one person in one go. So he kind of almost becomes that person, writes those bits, then he goes to the next character, and then at the end with sort of post-it notes, he kind of puts the story together. And how did you do that? Because again, Walter Pine has a very different distinctive voice versus Wakely versus Mad. You don't even need to tag who it is because we all know whose head we're inside. But did you do it that way or did you just write?
Oh, I just wrote. I don't like to divide points of view into chapters. I like to know what everyone's thinking during the conversation. When I go to I shouldn't probably say this, but if I go to a dinner party or a cocktail party, I am actively wondering what the person is thinking who's talking to me. Are they drifting? Are they thinking about something else? Probably if they're talking to me. But, and what everybody else is doing around the room. And, what are the thoughts of the caterers and are they tired? Is this yet another gig for them that they don't want to be doing? I think with copywriting, you build a certain empathy for audiences and for characters because you're always addressing someone. I don't write for fun. I write because I really want to understand people. And the way you do that is by listening and watching their bodies and thinking about, are they uncomfortable? Why would they be uncomfortable? Maybe something terrible has gone on with them. And in fact, the whole thing is something terrible has always happened to someone. We're all in this together and we've all gone through such hardship. And, your story, Katie, oh my God, I just felt so inspired by you. I mean, what you've had to face, you're very young and what you had to face is just incomprehensible to me. And so that's why these characters, I change point of view, sometimes sentence to sentence. And I know the audience will get it because I can make the voices distinctive enough, but I can make the feelings and worries and desires of that person be just theirs. So you begin to see who they are. It's really just me looking at parties going, I know you're not listening to me. I know you're thinking about something else.
I have another question because I write as well, and I've just got an agent. So I'm just getting that stuff. Yeah.
Well, one in 10,000 chance.
Oh, I know. Well, I was quite pleased with that. I was quite pleased with that number. Yeah. I'm on my way up.
Yeah.
But I did hear that you had, 98 rejections along the way with previous endeavors. I think I've actually had a few more than those. But what kept you going? Because if you say you don't write for fun, what kept you trying?
Well, with that novel, I couldn't get a single person to read it, minus the last person, because it was really long. And I think they thought, it's a debut novel. It's 700 pages. It sounds really weird. When I was writing the query, which I never used for lessons in chemistry, you tell somebody you're writing about a woman chemist in the 50s who has a cooking show she hates. People are like, I'm not in, No, it sounds horrible. I told one friend about it. She said, what are you doing? You're not a chemist. You don't like to cook. Even, my husband was like, you may have bitten off more than you can chew. But I thought, with this other book too, I'm sure that when I described it, it just sounds like something. I'm not good at querying. I think it sounds like something maybe no one would want to read. I did finally get someone to read that one. She only read the first 10,000 words, which is common. And then the very next day, she wrote me and she said, well, I love the voice and I love how this sounds, but I'm not going to sign you because you were foolish enough to write 700 pages as a debut novelist and you're not allowed to do that. She had all these, and she said, cut it in half and send it to me. And I thought, what a foolish thing to say. You haven't read it.
Yeah.
You the 10,000 words. You haven't read it. So I thought she's not for me. She did contact me, by the way, a couple other times and said, maybe you should be sending me the rest of it. I was just sort of done with her. But how I got over that was, I don't know, actually, to tell you the truth, I grieved for 9 months to a year because I loved that story. I think it's a great story.
Well, can you bring it back now? Now you've had your debut novel. Now you can write whatever you like.
I know. But the weirdest thing is that I've told my agents and editors, I have the story. They're not interested in seeing it.
Why?
And so I know. And I don't really understand. No one will address that elephant in the room. But, in a way, it's fine with me because I'm working on this other thing where I've taken some of those themes in the book and I'm applying them in this different way. And I'm really liking where I'm going. And that way I can feel like this other novel wasn't a waste of time at all. I don't think anything you do really is. You can, it's a learning process. But yeah, the way you just can't give up on yourself, right? I mean, in the end, you just can't say, are you really going to let these people who didn't read a word determine your future?
That's a very good way of looking at it.
Yeah, I just thought, don't let other people decide for you. And that's really what my main character in the book says. Don't let other people choose your destiny.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So let's go back to Elizabeth Zott. Where did the name Zott come from?
Oh, this is my favorite story. My poor husband, I've told this a couple times and he just cringes every time, but I was dating him. We lived in Palo Alto, California. There's an old diner in the middle outside in the countryside called Rosati's. Everyone calls it Zott's. And when we were first dating, we were having lunch there and we got in an argument, as we often did in the early days. We would often argue about politics and things. There were so many things we did not agree on, even though we're both very liberal. Anyway, he's very well educated. He has a much more beautiful resume than I do. But during this lunch one day, I said, well, we were talking about the medfly situation in California, and we were arguing about the steps that were being taken to eradicate medflies. And he said to me, when I met you, I did not know you would have this many opinions. And I said, oh, you don't like a woman with opinions? Yeah. And I said, boy, that's like probably the worst thing you could have said.
Yes.
So I left. Anyway, we ended up, of course, restoring everything. And he's great. He always says, I have to admit I wasn't a feminist now. Now he is. He wasn't a feminist then, but now he is. Yeah. And he realizes what a dumb thing that was to say to a woman. But when he first read the first draft, he goes, oh, Elizabeth Zott. I know where the name came from.
Such a great name. As is 630. I mean, when I've asked people who is their favorite character, 630 gets a lot of votes. So who did you base 630 on?
I based 630 on our dog Friday. He's the only character I based somebody on.
Yeah.
Friday had been a very badly abused dog that my kids had picked out in a dog shelter in Seattle. She'd been very badly abused to the point where somebody had burned cigarettes out on her.
Oh my.
Yeah, they'd cut her. He went to jail for dog abuse. And my kids fell in love with this dog, mangy dog with these scars all over her. And she smelled really bad. But we ended up taking her home. And she turned out to be this brilliant dog. I have to confess that I underestimated how smart she was. We didn't set out to teach her words. She made it really clear that she was going to learn words because whenever we sat together as a family, she would watch our mouths move. She never just looked at the floor or laid there. She was always part of the conversation. When she would walk with us, sometimes she'd turn her head, if we were saying things like, they're talking.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so she learned a lot, and she would demonstrate that she knew what we were talking about by retrieving objects that we were talking about. So our kids would talk about their toys, and she'd go get them. Or I lost my keys one time, and I said out loud, I can't find my keys. And she just looked at me like, how many times do we have to go through this? She went through my briefcase and she went through my gym bag, and then she opened the hall closet, which she could do. And she went through all the pockets in all the jackets, found my keys, threw them on the floor. Like,
that's amazing.
She is an amazing dog. When we were transferred to Switzerland, she learned German. She passed a dog test, which they give all dogs there. It's an hour long. It's all in German. She got 100%. They said it was the first dog that got 100% in 2 years.
What kind of dog test? My dog, who is just gorgeous, and I'm sure we underestimate her, but I mean, I don't think she'd pass a dog test in English, certainly not German.
I know, it's the Swiss are very, I love what they do with dogs. I think their belief is that the dog is a lot smarter than you are. And so they're really training the people to understand that their dogs are able to do all this stuff. They're very capable and they should be able to come on command. They absolutely have to know how to cross streets on their own. They have to know all of this stuff. But what they're really doing is training the humans. So my dog, Friday was just like, oh, yeah, I've got this. And the guy came back after the test and he said to me, I thought you said this dog was an American dog. And I said, yeah, she's American. And he said, no, this dog is Swiss. So she got a Swiss passport. It's hilarious.
Now you have 99. And why 99?
She came after 630 and she's kind of the face of 630's Instagram account, which I never keep up with, but she's a retired greyhound racer. She's 12 and a half now.
Was she a rescue dog as well?
Yeah, she's a rescue dog. And she'd obviously been through the mill. Her toes were all broken. And
oh my goodness.
Yeah,
Bonnie.
I know, just from racing. She raced all 4 years and she's very competitive. But, and it's obvious that she'd been through some very tough times. And she had been adopted by someone else and they'd returned her after a year because they said she was violent. And she's not violent. She's never hurt anything in her life. But I think, she just needed someone to just take their time and see who she was. So she's our dog, 99. And I named her after a friend of mine who died, unfortunately. But when we were kids growing up, and I'd known her since I was 9 months old and she was 3 months old, we always called ourselves 86 and 99 after this really, really dumb TV show called Get Smart. And those were the names of the spies, 86 and 99. And as we grew, we started watching that show when we were little kids. And we never not called ourselves 86 and 99. Well into, she was at my wedding. She referred to me, we always called each other by a number. And so when she was killed in a tragic accident, I couldn't believe that she was gone. And it took years for me to get over losing her. And when we adopted this dog, I wanted it, her number, by the way, was 86. And I wanted to name the dog 86, but I couldn't because 86 means the end. When you 86 something, especially, I guess, in kitchens and things, it means it's gone forever.
Oh, it does? I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah. And so there's a common saying in the United States, you've 86 something. I couldn't name her 86. And so I named her 99 after what she called me. And it was like hearing her again, and so it's been amazing. It's sort of weird that the dog is really named after my number, but it's because I can hear my friend in that.
I am thrilled to announce our first sponsor of the show, Hermit London. Hermit London is a sustainable fashion brand repurposing luxury hotel bed linen into one-of-a-kind pajamas. Hermit started in lockdown 2020 and is built on the discovery that an estimated 10 million tons of luxury hotel bed linen ends up in landfill every year in Europe alone. It is being thrown away due to small stains, pulls or frays, with an average life cycle of just 9 months. Did you know that it takes roughly 12,500 litres of water to produce just one bedsheet? Founder Ella transforms this luxury, often unused waste material into individual, characterful and supremely comfortable pajamas, giving you that hotel night sleep every night of the week. You can buy her pajamas and read more about her mission to end textile waste at www.hermitlondon.com. Treat yourself and treat the planet. What about Elizabeth Zott? Was there anybody in your life who inspired her?
No, I wrote my role model. Everyone asked me, I got an email today saying, is she inspired by this woman in Seattle who, no. I had to, all of my characters are hugely fictional. I think it's really limiting to write, at least for me, based on someone you know. I would never do that, first of all, to a friend. I would never do it to someone with whom I have an NDA relationship.
No.
And I would never do it to anyone should they recognize themselves, and it's very confining to write what you think someone is all about. So I just decided I was going to write my role model, and that's what I did.
I remember hearing about you talking about your mother who lived at that time and had to have her checks countersigned and all the rest of it. She reminded me, as you were talking about her, she reminded me a little bit of Elizabeth Zott in a quiet way, but she was nursing HIV patients, wasn't she?
Yeah.
Was that when you grew up?
Well, she did that after. So my mom is in the book, to tell you the truth. She's Marjorie Phyllis, who wants to be an open heart surgeon.
Oh, yes.
My mom was an incredible seamstress. When we were growing up, and there were 4 of us, 4 girls, we were always getting injured. My mother would stitch us up herself. And she was a really, really talented nurse. She always used to say, and I know this is going to sound terrible, she always used to say, well, women can't be doctors. We're not smart enough. But I think in her heart, she knew that she was well beyond capable of becoming a doctor. She just knew that door was closed to her. And so she gave up nursing when she first became pregnant with my oldest sister. But, the thing about my mom that I really respect and admire is that she went back to it into her 50s when she had to sit in a classroom and everybody else was 19 years old. And she was there and she was 55 renewing her nursing license. The first year she went back to nursing, she won Nurse of the Year. And the second year, she was the only nurse in her entire hospital to volunteer for the AIDS floor. She was the only nurse on the AIDS floor.
Oh my goodness, the only one.
I mean, doctors would barely go up there, but my mom took care of every single one of them. And I went to pick her up at work one night and I couldn't find her anywhere. No one, visitors did not really go up on the AIDS floor. But my mom used to say, there is absolutely nothing to be afraid of. And I went up there to look for her and I found her reading to a group of men who were in their beds. And she was holding one man's hand. I think she was reading The Three Musketeers or Robinson Crusoe, something like that. But anyway, I just stood in the doorway and I was listening to her and she couldn't see me, but this other guy saw me and she finally finished about 20 minutes later. And he said, thank you for your patience, but you have to understand, she's our mom too. They'd all been abandoned by their families.
There was so much fear around that at the time, wasn't there? No one we've had just gone through COVID when there was so much fear around that as well. But I do remember no one really understood it. And you were a complete pariah if you had it. And so that was incredibly brave of her to just have that strength, not to listen to everyone else and care for them.
That was my mom. I mean, she volunteered. We all volunteer, and she instilled that in us, that you must always volunteer at something and give back to society. That is your job as a human being on the earth, to help somebody who is less than you do. And we had lived abroad in South America, and my mom signed me up to volunteer in a leper colony. That was my mom.
Oh, didn't she?
Oh, you're going to be fine. And I have to tell you, I only lasted 2 times. But my mom worked there for 2 years.
In the leper colony?
Yeah.
Wow. It's amazing.
She was a very, very brave person.
Well, you have done a lot of charitable works as well. How did you become involved with the Leander Trust?
Oh, my gosh. Because they're, rowers. And, rowing is such an incredible sport. And I really hope to help make it more inclusive and open. In the United States, we have a lot of foundations that are trying to get more diversity into rowing, because it not only teaches you perseverance and ways to overcome your troubles in life, but you create a family within rowing that's different from any other family you'll create in any other way. And so I was delighted. The Leander Foundation Trust, they see it the same way. And once a rower, always a rower. And whenever you meet other rowers, it's like this instant click between you, because you know what it takes to be a rower and how much suffering is involved, but how much goodness there is in it.
Yeah. Well, I rode at university and then I coached it when I was teaching.
Oh
I was
my gosh.
teaching at a boys' school, but I was a terrible coach. They would have been better actually with nobody and teaching them. But you're right.
Come on, I'm sure that's not true.
No, it is true. And I could get every boy in that boat to say, you did not help us. But you're right. It's about the boat. You don't want to shine. It's the one sport where you mustn't shine.
Exactly.
Which is really, really cool, actually.
It is. I think this idea of collaboration, cooperation, you all share the same goal. I like the idea. I mean, in my boat, you may not like everybody in your boat, but once you're in the boat together, you cooperate, you work together, and you help each other. And I just think, oh, it would be great if we applied that to politics or to our own workplaces.
Yeah.
Because we do have the same goals.
Yes. Yes, we do. And you also support homeless charities, I think I'm right in saying, and food banks. And is there a particular story or experience that's touched you in your work in that area?
Yeah, I think, for me, when I was in Switzerland, I worked with Syrian refugees. And when I was working at a soup kitchen here in London for 4 years or so. And I really enjoyed it because I think when you work with a certain population, there are a lot of assumptions people have about these people and why they're homeless and if they're on drugs or they're alcoholics or whatever. But a lot of times something bad has happened to them. And that's all it was. They had bad fortune. And so if you have a chance to help that person get back on their feet, it's, I tell you personal stories about these people, but it's their private information.
Yeah.
But I've been really lucky. I did run into somebody who was homeless for 4 years. And I ran into him in London on the tube. He recognized me immediately. We were just chatting. And I asked him what he was doing. He said, I'm back to being an architect.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah, he'd been living on the streets 4 years in London.
I have a friend who goes and puts tents out in Westminster, and he's out at 4:30 every morning, going and doing that. So it's the work that you guys do is really impressive. Bonnie, I'm hopping around all over the place, and I've got so many questions I want to ask you because it's so nice talking to you. But I know you're going to have to go in a minute. You have 2 daughters. I think I'm right in saying that you adopted 2 Chinese girls, and I worked in a Chinese orphanage decades ago now, just for a couple of weeks. It was with a charity, and although the people that were there were kind, it was not a warm, nurturing place to be. So I just wondered how old they were when you met them and what it was like.
Oh, it's incredible. We've been rejected. I mean, talk about rejection. We've been rejected by everyone to become adoptive parents. We were rejected by everyone in the United States. We were rejected in South America, where I thought for sure I'd be a shoo-in because I spoke Spanish and I'd lived there. But when China opened, we applied there. And it was really...
Can I just stop you a minute? Why? What was the reason for rejecting you?
Well, in South America, it was because we weren't Catholic.
Oh.
And in the United States, it was because, believe it or not, I was a working mom.
Oh my goodness.
Everyone wanted the, nuclear family where the woman stayed at home. And I was like, I can't stay at home, but also I want to be a role model if we should have a girl that working normal. I'm in touch with the orphanages our kids came from. They kept in touch all these years. The people in there were absolutely stunningly wonderful, so well organized, but they were also very honest about their situation and what had caused it and what had caused, what Mao had done with the one-child rule and how, women there it was not an easy life for them. These babies, it's not like their parents were dead. They were forced to give up their children. And it was just a horrific situation for everyone. And, a lot of kids don't make it out of those orphanages. They're not clean places. Ours were not heated. It was horrible. But anyway, our kids are great. They don't like me to talk too much about their past. And so I respect that. But we're an extremely close family. And they are incredible people. One's an art director, and the other one works in social justice arena. She is involved in making sure that higher ed is available, higher education is available to everyone. She's profoundly good at it. So I feel really lucky that I got to be their mom, and my husband feels really lucky that he got to be their dad. And we're about to spend, 3 weeks together on vacation, and we can't wait.
That's fantastic. It wasn't Chengdu, was it? It wasn't an orphanage in Chengdu.
No, they were from Jiangsu. One was from Suzhou, and the other one was from Wuxi.
Going back to your lovely, brilliant Elizabeth Zott, who has so much to overcome, and she's got prejudice, trauma, she's had a grief-ridden childhood, terrible parents. What would you say has been the biggest challenge in your life, and how have you overcome it?
Oh, well, one of them I won't talk about. It involves other people, and I think it would embarrass them. But I think, I've been through cancer twice.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
no, but actually I would say that mine's relatively simple in comparison to being faced with cancer.
Yeah, no, I was diagnosed really young too, at age 19.
Wow.
And then I've had different kinds of cancers. That was because my mom, when she was pregnant with me, took a drug called DES, and some of us ended up with multiple cancers. And I'm one of those kids. And so it was a difficult thing, because you realize, when you're that young.
It's just too young to be having that worry.
Yeah, but when I met my husband, my poor husband, who made that mistake about telling me I had too many and he's just absolutely the best person in the entire world. I adore him. He had also been through just a horrible experiences. And the two of us, when we met, we did not like each other at all. And it wasn't until I actually wrote about our first date for Bon Appetit. They asked me to write about it because it was a really funny thing. We did not like each other at all. And then at the end, we ended up being really honest with each other about what had happened in our lives. We were in our 20s, and we told each other things that we would never tell anybody else. And we really realized suddenly, oh, you see the bad side of life at such a young age, and here you are. And that bonded us immediately. So it turned out this awful thing had happened to both of us, had actually brought us together in a far more meaningful way than, anything else could have.
Wow. I wasn't expecting that answer. But final question, which is that I've been watching Lessons in Chemistry on Apple Plus. Brie Larson does a brilliant job of playing Elizabeth. So I'm so enjoying it. But there are some character changes, and I'm not sure I'm very happy with any of the character changes. I preferred the book. What input did you have on the TV series?
None.
None at all.
No, I'm listed as co-executive producer, but I really didn't do anything. I did at the very last minute, 2 weeks before filming, they sent me the scripts. And at that, they had gone through so many writers. The first writer who was going to work on it was Susanna Grant. She wrote Erin Brockovich. That's why I signed with them. She's a phenomenal writer, but she had to drop off about halfway through. Then they hired another writer. It did not go well. 9 months later, they fired her. They had a writing room. They let them all go. Then they hired another writer. He came in kind of at the last minute, and he had a lot to do. I think he is more from a comedy background. Anyway, so yes, they made a lot of changes. And am I happy with them? I mean, honestly, no, and they know it. But I think Brie Larson did a really good job. And I think they get the science wrong at the end, but, which I find just cringeworthy. The erging is wrong. And I'd beg them to hire a coach for that. But, I think overall, when you sell your book to Hollywood, and so many writers counseled me, they said, you are not going to have any control. It's Hollywood. They do whatever they want. And they're absolutely right. And they said, what you do is you hand your book over, and then you run in the other direction. And I think that's good advice. It was really hard for me to do that, but I did it because of Susanna Grant, because of the way she writes. And unfortunately, she wasn't able to carry it through. She wasn't part of it. She's still listed as executive producer, but her writing is not in there. And I think had it been, it would have been
closer.
It would have had more depth. And yes, they do change the characters a lot. And a lot of things just don't add up for me. But having said all that, everyone I met was wonderful. And it is what it is.
Yeah, it's still great. And if anyone hasn't read the book, they will fall in love with the series. It's just, particularly there was Harriet Sloane I just loved. And I started because I've been reading it again and I was jotting down what I call your sentences of pure delight, which are kind of those simple sentences where you say something and it packs such a punch. There's one with Harriet where she's having a debate with Mad, and Mad says, when do you ever have to say or do anything you don't want to do? And Harriet, who, as we know, has a repulsive husband, closes her eyes and pictures Mr. Sloane. And, just think in that simple sentence, we know it all.
I think what they did with Harriet was in the wrong direction because we needed an older woman. And I had suggested Viola Davis in that role. I think she would have been tremendous. But I think also they were adding too many issues and then things don't wrap up.
Yes.
I just don't watch the series because I'll have a heart attack. I didn't enjoy watching it for me because it's my work. It's actually, that is not my work. It's so different from the book and the feelings in the book. I've heard from so many readers who are upset about the series. And, I'm just like, oh, I know, but it's a different animal. It's a different animal and you just have to let them do what they want to do. And that is it. And you just have to be okay in your soul with that and walk away. You don't really have a choice.
No. Well, I would say to those readers who are unhappy, just go back and read the book all over again. Michael Caine said in an interview that I actually listened to the other day, use the difficulty. That was the advice that he was given. And so all I can say is thank goodness you used yours because you have given so many of us so much joy. So Bonnie, thank you so much for today. And thank you again for giving me so much sunlight on my road to recovery. And I could talk to you forever, but I know I have to stop.
Well, thank you so much, Katie. Honestly, I'm so glad you contacted me. Your story is just absolutely amazing. And honestly, when I read it, I thought, well, I'm not going to say no to Elizabeth Zott.
Thank you. You've been listening to Bandwidth Conversations. Thanks to Anna B., Head of Marketing, to Matthew Passy and all of the podcast consultant, to Bagawire for the music, to the Money Maze podcast. Thank you for listening. Any feedback, please email me, katie@bandwidthconversations.com. Please sign up on our website, www.bandwidthconversations.com, so we can notify you about new podcast releases. We hope to see you again soon.